everybody. I'm your host Noopur back with another interesting interview. And today I have Melissa Boggs with us, and with whom we are going to talk about some interesting aspect of being a woman business leader. Hello, Melissa. Welcome to our studio.
Hello, Nipur. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing, Melissa? How are things out there?
Oh, really well. Beautiful day outside. Fall here in Denver. So it's good.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. So, Melissa, just before we begin our conversation about being a women business leader, why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Boggs. I am a leadership coach and an employee experience design consultant. So I help organizations to sort of bridge the gap between leadership and employees. Sometimes that's cultural, sometimes that's societal, and help everyone, leaders included, be more engaged in their work. I was formerly of the co-CEO of Scrum Alliance and have been in the Agile community for 13 years now. So excited to be with you.
That's amazing, Melissa. I'm equally excited to have you with me and excited for the kind of conversation we are going to have from here. So, Melissa, you are a business leader, and what kind of roadblocks you have faced in your journey to become a woman business leader?
So it's a good question, and it's one that I get a lot actually. So I actually could break it up into two different types of roadblocks. So there's the roadblocks that you have just on becoming a leader in general. And then there are some more specific roadblocks that you might encounter, just because you're a woman, or really anyone who is, in a marginalized community. Um, so in terms of the roadblocks to becoming a leader just in general for anyone, I think that has a lot to do with self-reflection. Like a lot of the roadblocks that we encounter are because of our self-limiting beliefs. We see a role that we might be interested in, but we may not believe that we have what it takes to actually do the role. And often it's things that we have made up in our head. Often it is actually not as difficult as we might believe that it is. So it, sort of starts with, what are my strengths? What are good matches for me in leadership? And then, first of all, believing that I can do that. And then, taking the steps to develop yourself in pursuit of that. And so I've definitely been guilty of that in my past where I, you know, limited myself and what I thought I could do. Um, but beyond that, there are definitely moments where my leadership style may not match what people expect. It does not mean that it is any less effective. And so I have had a lot of conversations about this in my career where, especially early on, like very first time that I was a manager, I had male manager counterparts who I adored. They were wonderful people, but they would really encourage me to be more like them, be more assertive and be louder. And I'm just not going to do that. And it was actually like a few years later that one of them came back to me and apologized and said, I was wrong. Like, I should have never been trying to convince you to be like me because your style as a leader is just as effective and just as important as, mine. And it's quite funny too, because it's not even always gender. It's not always male or female. It's actually how we view leadership styles. You have men who can be a little quieter in their leadership style. Doesn't make them any less effective. So I think that's really what we sort of have to watch out for, and one of the things that I've run into in my journey.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Melissa. I think most of the times it is not the gender, but the how you perceive it, how you want to lead is what matters. So yeah, thanks for showing some light on this. Also, last couple of years had been very difficult for organizations if we talk about especially during the pandemic, and there's impact still there post pandemic sort of effects for the organizations. How do you think organizations can deal with the impact of the coronavirus outbreak on business? As a leader, how do you think one should deal with
So there's, again, sort of two answers to that. One, I think for those of us who have been in the agile community, for a while, none of the effects of the pandemic really surprised us, meaning that we've been telling organizations for years that they need to create organizations that can pivot, that can be flexible, that can be adaptable. And this just accelerated that, you know, very, very quickly. Um, so I think, in terms of just you have to build your organization in a way that it doesn't crumble when something changes. And for many years, we didn't do that. We created very rigid systems that can't really withstand something new happening. So, it just accelerated what we've been saying for quite some time. On the flip side of that, I think the other impact is now we can't go back. And by that, I mean, now employees understand their value. Employees understand that there are flexible ways of working that were not allowed before. But because of the pandemic, we were able to prove that they're feasible, that we can still be productive, you know, balancing our life and our work, so to speak. And so I think the other thing that organizations are going to have to do is recognize that we are at a crossroads, and that if you're not able to build not only your organization but your employee experience to be more flexible, then you are likely going to lose those employees to either other companies or even to entrepreneurship. A lot of people also learned through the pandemic that there were things that they could do, talents that they had that they wanted to tap into, that they could just work for themselves. And, with technology, that's easier than ever. And so, yeah, I mean, I think adaptability, agility, flexibility is sort of the word of the day for how organizations are going to have to look in the future.
it? Yeah, true that. So the agile implementation has already uh, warned, would not be a right word, maybe had given an alert to organizations that you might need to change at any point of time. So yeah, I agree to that. One important question, Melissa, I think currently everybody is facing that challenge of balancing professional and personal life. How do you manage your life in both the fronts?
Oh, that is a very important question. Um, First of all, I am a huge believer in boundaries. Um, Even when you're working from home, you can have some measure of boundaries. Now, everyone has different experiences in terms of, whether or not you have a specific place that you can work in your home. Like, I totally recognize that, but you can still have mental boundaries. If you're able to have physical boundaries, like, I'm lucky that I have this one room that this is work, and I don't generally actually come in this room unless I'm going to work, and I don't generally work outside of this room. Now, I understand that not everyone has that ability, but you can still create these mental, emotional boundaries for yourself. Um, I actually had see a therapist because mental health is important. And one of the conversations that we had was that when I used to work in an office, the drive home from work was very important for me because it was where my brain made that switch. Nobody loves to commute, but mine was only, 15, 20 minutes. And in that 15, 20 minutes, I would turn off, thoughts of work, and I would think about what I was going to do with my kids or my husband or what we were going to have for dinner. And one of the things that she sort of pointed out to me is if I'm only walking out of this door and my kids and my husband are on the other side of the door, there wasn't a lot of transition time for my brain, and for my heart, basically. And so I started trying to come up with ways to build in, if I'm not going to drive somewhere, then, am I going to go take a walk by myself, and just tell my family I'll be back in 10 minutes, but like I need to turn it off. So I think that's really important. Also, things like either turning off your Slack or your texts or your emails when you're not working, um, because this always on, always available lifestyle is even harder when you're at home. Um, it makes it harder to create those boundaries. And then just having really good communication with whether it's your team, your boss, whoever it might be that you need to create those boundaries with them, create working agreements. I talk a lot about the implicit and explicit policies in organizations that might create a culture of being always on. It may not be that it's written in the handbook, that you always have to have your Slack on. But if your boss always has Slack on their phone, then do you feel like you can turn it off? So leaders have to be really aware of that too, and that they may accidentally be sending a message that they didn't realize that they were sending. So it's really all about boundaries and thinking about them very clearly and communicating them.
Yeah, true that. I think that's going to be really helpful for everybody who is listening to this conversation. Melissa, coming back to being a woman business leader, have you ever come across any stereotypes in this journey? Like women are more emotional and less decisive than men, and if any other kind of stereotype that you have faced, and how do you address it?
Certainly. In fact, I would even venture to say that more than we realize, even women internalize some of those messages themselves. Um, and so, yes, it has certainly come up for me. I, especially when I was at Scrum Alliance, my partner was someone who was a older male, who had his own strengths, and so there were times that we were compared. And I think it's just important to recognize sort of what I said before, that there are many different styles of leadership and there are many different ways of showing up at work, and all of them are required. Most of them are required. As long as they are styles that care about people, I can be very decisive, given, you know, circumstances, whatever the situation might be. But I think there's also benefit to thinking through things, and like understanding the ramifications of decisions. And so I don't think it has to do with my gender, even though that is absolutely a stereotype. Frankly, my father is just like me, and I'm sure I got it from him. And so, I think it just, while there are stereotypes, all of this is required. Um, this idea of women being emotional, men have been told for decades that they shouldn't be emotional. Men have emotions too, right? And, I definitely, when I work with male leaders, talk with them about how important that vulnerability is and how it gives their teams, their employees permission to also be vulnerable. And, to quote Brene Brown, who many of us, love, you cannot be courageous without vulnerability. Vulnerability. Man, that's a hard word to say. Vulnerability. Um, and so, teaching our sons that it is okay to be vulnerable, teaching our daughters that, it's okay to be decisive. We shouldn't be boxing in by gender. We should be talking about what is your leadership style, where are you most comfortable, and where are you pushing your boundaries a little bit in a good way, um, regardless of your gender. What's going to help you get the most out of yourself and out of your organization?
Yeah, thank you for sharing this, Melissa. I think there are a couple of other stereotypes faced by leaders, I would say, not just women leaders across different domains, and hopefully we get to talk about those as well sometime.
Mhm.
Um, now moving forward to a path to leadership, Melissa, do you think entrepreneurship is the only path to be a leader?
Is entrepreneurship the only path to being a leader? I don't think it's the only path, but I do think it's probably, if we're defining entrepreneurship as this like um, this sort of burning to create and like this desire to kind of blaze your own path in the world, then I think that most leaders have some degree of that. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to go start your own business. That's not the only path. But I think that it is, most leaders have some element of that. And it may show up in different ways for different people, but they have this desire to like do something new, to bring something new to the table, to be creative and innovative. And the best leaders bring that to the table and bring it out in their team. They look for ways to um, make it safe for people to feel that way. Um, but I don't think it necessarily everyone has to own their own business in order to pursue that. In fact, the best organizations, this is one of the things I do work with companies about, is they're creating inside of their organization the ability to act on those innovative thoughts and feelings and that creativity in the safety of the organization and for the benefit of the organization. So, no, I don't think it's the only path, but I think it's the path for maybe these new or agile organizations that we're talking about. You know, um, I'm not sure that you can survive in the world that is moving as fast as our world is if you're not forward thinking, if you don't have a desire to create and be innovative.
Yeah, and both of us belong to agile community as well, Melissa. So just to conclude this discussion, where do you see the agile community heading, and more specifically, talking about the inclusion part of it, not just the gender inclusion, but um, inclusion at a broader scale.
Sure. Oh gosh, that is a question that comes up all the time from many different angles. Um, in terms of you know, not just inclusion, but diversity, inclusion, belonging, all of these things. I think that we are really well equipped to lead in that area, right? Like we are a human-centric community who cares about people, who has a set of values and principles that are rooted in people, but it doesn't necessarily come naturally because there is unconscious bias that finally, as like a world, we're talking about. So it takes work. And I think that there are a number of people in our community that are doing that work and leading the way in that work. Um, but it's definitely going to take that work. On the flip side of that, I think the positive is that because of the pandemic, because so many things have become virtual, it's now connected us in a way that we almost, it's not that we couldn't be connected before, but I don't think we realized that we could, And so, just as an example, I know that there are training classes that are from all the different organizations that are reaching underserved communities that before we might not have actually physically traveled to or may not have been able to physically travel to, nor could those community members travel to a different metro area. And so, in some ways, we're expanding the community, um, and we were forced to, like, but it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing that, like, we are now able to have these conversations with people that we might not otherwise have reached. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of self work, a lot of community work to be done in terms of inclusion. And frankly, I don't claim to be an expert. I'm learning more every day myself. Um, but I also think in the last 18 months, we've made progress in like a totally different path that maybe we would not have seen otherwise. And now it's like it's very clear. Oh wow, like if we continue virtual work like this, then we continue to bring the world closer together. That sounds very like Disney Channel, but you know, everyone closer together.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's wonderful how the Agile community is growing over the course of time, and we hope only the best for the community and the people. And I thank you, Melissa, for taking out time and discussing this important aspect of being a woman business leader. And I'm sure a lot of people watching this interview would get inspired by what you have shared and from your journey and experiences. So thanks once again for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.